The Sands Hotel in Las Vegas was tense on the night of March 15, 1964. Two of the biggest names in music were performing in competing venues just blocks apart. Elvis Presley at the International Hotel and Johnny Rivers at the Sands. Both shows were sold out. Both artists were at the peak of their careers, and both men knew they were being compared, measured against each other, forced into a rivalry neither of them had asked for. Johnny Rivers was 32 years old, riding high on a string of hit records that had made him one of the most successful artists of the early 60s. He had his own sound, his own style, his own devoted fan base. But no matter how successful he became, music journalists and fans always compared him to Elvis. The next Elvis, almost as good as Elvis, second only to the King. It was exhausting, demeaning, impossible to escape. Elvis, for his part, was struggling with his own demons. At 29, he was trying to transition from movies back to serious music, fighting against the perception that he'd become a joke, a caricature of himself. And everywhere he looked, younger artists like Johnny Rivers were nipping at his heels, threatening to make him irrelevant. After their respective shows that night, both men ended up at the same after-hours club, a private establishment where Vegas entertainers gathered after performing. They'd been avoiding each other for months, both aware of the tension, both tired of the constant comparisons. But that night, fueled by alcohol and exhaustion and years of frustration, they finally confronted each other. "You think you're so much better than everyone else?" Johnny said, his voice loud enough that other people in the club turned to watch. "You think just because you were first, that makes you untouchable, that no one else can ever measure up to the great Elvis Presley?" Elvis, who'd been trying to ignore Johnny's presence all evening, turned to face him. "I never said I was better than anyone. That's what other people say. That's what the press says. I'm just trying to do my job, same as you." "Your job," Johnny laughed bitterly. "Your job is easy. You just have to show up and people worship you. The rest of us have to actually work, have to actually prove ourselves every single night. And no matter what we do, no matter how good we are, we're always second to you. Always the next Elvis, or almost as good as Elvis, never just ourselves." Elvis stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think my life is easy? You think being Elvis Presley is some kind of gift? I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything normal. I'm trapped in this persona, this character everyone expects me to be. At least you get to be yourself. At least people see you as a real person instead of a product." They were face to face now, both men tense, the club silent as everyone watched. It looked like a fight was about to break out. Security started moving toward them, but then something unexpected happened. Johnny's anger crumbled, his face twisted with emotion, and suddenly he wasn't a rival anymore. He was just a tired, frustrated man who'd been carrying too much for too long. "I can't do this anymore," Johnny said, his voice breaking. "I can't keep trying to be you. I can't keep living in your shadow. I'll never measure up. I'll never be Elvis Presley." Elvis looked at Johnny for a long moment. Then he put his hand on Johnny's arm. "You're right," Elvis said quietly. "You'll never be Elvis Presley. But you don't need to be. You're Johnny Rivers. That's enough. That's more than enough." The simple recognition, the validation from the one person whose opinion mattered most in that moment, broke through years of Johnny's frustration and insecurity. The two men sat down together and talked for 3 hours that night, about music, about fame, about the impossible pressures they both faced, about loneliness and fear and the price of success. By the time they left the club, they weren't rivals anymore. They were friends. Over the next 12 years, Elvis and Johnny developed one of the closest friendships in Elvis's life. Johnny became a regular at Graceland, part of Elvis's inner circle, someone Elvis trusted implicitly. They spent countless hours together, talking about music, about life, about their shared experiences navigating fame and pressure. Johnny was different from most of Elvis's other friends. He wasn't an employee, wasn't dependent on Elvis for income, wasn't afraid to tell Elvis hard truths. When Elvis's prescription drug use started spiraling out of control, Johnny was one of the few people willing to confront him about it. When Elvis's marriage to Priscilla was falling apart, Johnny was there to listen without judgment. Johnny understood me in a way most people didn't. Elvis said in a 1973 interview. He knew what it was like to have people expect things from you, to have your art turned into a product, to wonder if anyone actually sees the real you under all the fame. We could talk to each other honestly because we'd both lived through it. The friendship wasn't one-sided. Elvis supported Johnny's career, recommended him for gigs, collaborated on a few recordings that were never officially released. When Johnny went through a difficult divorce in 1970, Elvis let him stay at Graceland for 2 months, gave him space to heal and rebuild. They had inside jokes, shared memories, the kind of bond that comes from genuine mutual respect and affection. Other members of Elvis's entourage sometimes felt jealous of how close the two men were, how Elvis seemed to value Johnny's opinion more than theirs. In early 1976, Johnny Rivers was in financial trouble. His music career had stalled as newer artists dominated the charts. His divorce had been expensive, draining his savings and leaving him with significant debt. He had creditors calling, bills he couldn't pay, and no clear path forward. A publisher approached him with an offer that seemed like salvation: write a tell-all book about Elvis Presley and receive a substantial advance that would solve his immediate money problems and buy him time to rebuild his career. Johnny said no initially. Elvis was his friend, his brother, the one person in the industry he'd been able to trust completely. You don't betray friends for money. You don't sell out someone who'd been there for you when you needed help. But the publisher was persistent, offering more money, pointing out that dozens of people had already written books about Elvis, arguing that Johnny's insider perspective would be more honest and fair than the sensationalized accounts from people who didn't really know Elvis at all. Johnny rationalized. He convinced himself that he could write a book that was truthful without being exploitative, that he could share insights about Elvis while still protecting their friendship, that Elvis would understand he needed the money, that this was just business in an industry where everyone eventually wrote their memoirs, that their bond was strong enough to survive it. He was wrong on all counts, catastrophically wrong in ways he wouldn't fully understand until it was too late to take any of it back. Elvis, the man behind the legend, was published in October 1976. The book was marketed as an intimate portrait by Elvis's closest friend, someone who'd seen him at his best and worst. It contained details about Elvis's prescription drug use, his failed marriage, his deepest insecurities and fears, his declining health and increasing paranoia. Things Johnny had learned in confidence, shared in moments of vulnerability and trust, revealed to the world, because Johnny needed money more than he needed to honor his friend's trust and privacy. Elvis learned about the book from a journalist who called asking for comment on Johnny's revelations. Elvis hadn't known the book existed. Johnny hadn't warned him, hadn't asked permission, hadn't given him any heads up that private conversations were about to become public. Elvis's reaction was devastation, followed by cold fury. He called Johnny immediately. "How could you?" Elvis asked. "How could you take everything I told you in confidence and sell it? I trusted you." Johnny tried to explain about the money, about the debt, about the publisher's assurances, but his excuses sounded hollow even to himself. "I needed the money, Elvis. I was desperate." "So you sold our friendship," Elvis said. "You sold me for money. That's what I'm worth to you." "It's not like that," Johnny said desperately. "I still care about you. The book is honest, it's fair, it's not sensationalized." "It's a betrayal," Elvis said. "Everything in that book I told you because I trusted you, because you were my friend. And you took that trust and turned it into a product. You became exactly what we both hated, someone who treats people like commodities." Elvis hung up. That was the last conversation they ever had. Johnny tried multiple times to reach Elvis after that call. He sent letters apologizing. He showed up at Graceland and was turned away by security. He called mutual friends asking them to intervene. But Elvis was done. The friendship was over, killed by Johnny's decision to prioritize money over loyalty. For Elvis, the betrayal was particularly painful, because Johnny had been one of the few people he'd trusted completely. In a life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, Johnny had seemed different. And discovering that Johnny was just like everyone else, willing to exploit their relationship for personal gain, reinforced Elvis's worst beliefs about human nature and the impossibility of genuine connection. The book sold moderately well, enough to solve Johnny's immediate financial problems. But the cost was higher than he'd anticipated. Other artists who'd trusted Johnny now kept their distance. Opportunities dried up. People in the industry knew what he'd done, and it tainted his reputation. More importantly, Johnny was consumed by guilt. He'd destroyed the most meaningful friendship of his life for money that was gone within a year. He'd betrayed a man who'd supported him, believed in him, treated him like a brother. And he couldn't undo it. Couldn't take back the book, couldn't restore the trust he'd shattered. On August 15th, 1977, the day before he died, Elvis was at Graceland surrounded by friends and staff. He was in poor health, struggling with exhaustion and the effects of years of prescription drug abuse. He knew, though perhaps not consciously, that his time was running out. That evening, Elvis was talking with Charlie Hodge about forgiveness, about regrets, about people he'd lost over the years, and he brought up Johnny Rivers. "If you see Johnny," Elvis said quietly, "tell him I forgive him. Tell him I understand he was desperate. Tell him I'm sorry our friendship ended the way it did." Charlie was surprised. Elvis hadn't mentioned Johnny in months. It seemed to have written him off completely. "You forgive him?" Charlie asked. "After what he did?" "Life's too short to hold on to anger," Elvis said. "I'm tired of being mad. I'm tired of carrying all this hurt. If I see him again someday, I want it to be clean between us." Those were among the last meaningful conversations Elvis had. Less than 24 hours later, he was found dead in his Graceland bathroom. He was 42 years old. Johnny Rivers learned about Elvis's death from a phone call from Charlie Hodge early on the morning of August 17, 1977. Charlie, remembering Elvis's final words from just 2 days earlier, told Johnny about the forgiveness, about Elvis's wish for things to be clean between them, about how in his final hours Elvis had chosen grace over bitterness. Johnny broke down completely on the phone. The relief of forgiveness mixed with the impossibility of reconciliation, of knowing Elvis had forgiven him, but they'd never have another conversation, never rebuild what had been destroyed, never have the chance to be friends again, or for Johnny to properly apologize and make amends for his betrayal. At Elvis's funeral on August 18, 1977, Johnny was allowed to attend as part of the general mourning crowd. He wasn't part of the inner circle anymore, wasn't given special access, was just another face in the crowd of thousands who came to pay respects. During the service, Johnny broke down sobbing, unable to contain his grief and guilt. A reporter who'd covered the friendship and betrayal approached him afterward. "How do you feel about Elvis's death?" the reporter asked. "I loved him," Johnny said through tears. "I loved him and I betrayed him. I needed money and I sold our friendship. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And he forgave me. But I never got to thank him for that forgiveness. I never got to tell him how much his friendship meant to me. I traded the best thing in my life for money that's gone now, and I can't take it back. The reporter's story ran in several papers, Johnny's public confession of guilt and regret. It didn't change anything, didn't bring Elvis back, didn't undo the betrayal. But it was honest, perhaps the first truly honest thing Johnny had said publicly about the situation. Johnny Rivers continued performing until his retirement in the late 1990s. He never wrote another tell-all book, never again exploited private relationships for money. The guilt over what he'd done to Elvis stayed with him for the rest of his life. In interviews over the years, Johnny was candid about his betrayal and its consequences. "I made the worst decision of my life for the worst reasons," Johnny said in a 1985 interview. "I had a real friendship with an extraordinary man, and I destroyed it for money. That money's gone. My friend is gone. And I have to live with knowing I'm the one who ended it." The story of Elvis and Johnny became a cautionary tale about friendship and betrayal in the entertainment industry, about how financial pressure can corrupt even genuine relationships, about the impossibility of putting a price on trust and loyalty. Elvis's forgiveness in his final hours became an important part of his legacy, showing a capacity for grace and mercy even when he'd been genuinely hurt. The fact that he chose to release his anger and offer forgiveness to someone who'd betrayed him revealed a spiritual maturity that existed alongside his flaws and struggles. Elvis, the man behind the legend, is now mostly forgotten. The book that ended a friendship and haunted Johnny Rivers didn't change history, but the friendship mattered, the betrayal mattered, and the forgiveness mattered most, proof that love can survive even without trust.